Most people think history is simple. Historians gather documents, they record what happened, and they assemble those facts into a story about the past. But the British philosopher Collingwood believed this view of history is deeply mistaken, because the past is gone. It no longer exists. No historian has ever observed the Roman Empire. No historian witnessed the signing of the Magna Carta. No historian stood beside Caesar as he crossed the Rubicon. So if historians cannot observe the past directly, what exactly are they studying? Collingwood's answer was radical. History, he argued, is not primarily about events. It is about thought. In the ancient world, history was often understood as the recording of memorable events. Greek historians such as Herodotus and Thucydides attempted to explain wars, political struggles, and the actions of powerful leaders. Their goal was to preserve the memory of important deeds and to explain how events unfolded. In many ways, their work was remarkably sophisticated. Thucydides, for example, tried to analyze political motives and strategic decisions during the Peloponnesian War. He rejected mythological explanations and instead looked for human causes: ambition, fear, calculation, and power. In doing so, he helped move historical writing away from legend and toward rational explanation. But even so, ancient historiography had important limitations. Greek historians were primarily concerned with events themselves: battles, speeches, political struggles. The historian described what happened and attempted to explain its causes, but the deeper reconstruction of the reasoning inside historical actions was still largely absent. History also remained focused on great deeds and great individuals. Kings, generals, and political leaders dominated the narrative. The everyday thinking of societies, their institutions, ideas, and intellectual developments received far less attention. And perhaps most importantly, history was still largely particularistic. Greek historians wrote about the Greek world. The story of humanity as a whole had not yet emerged. In this sense, ancient historians had achieved something remarkable. They made history rational, but they had not yet made it philosophical. The deeper question, how human thought itself shapes historical action, had not yet fully appeared. During the medieval period, history came to be interpreted within a very different framework. Events were no longer understood merely as political or military developments. They were interpreted within a theological vision of the world. The rise and fall of kingdoms, victories in battle, and the collapse of empires were often understood as expressions of divine providence. History was not simply a sequence of events. It was part of a larger moral drama. Human actions unfolded within a world belonged to be governed by God. But this religious interpretation also introduced something historically significant. Earlier civilizations often understood history in particularistic terms. Greek historians wrote primarily about the Greek world. Roman historians wrote about Rome. Each civilization largely treated its own story as the center of history. Christian thought began to move beyond this limitation, because Christianity presented history as a universal story. All human beings were understood as part of a single narrative of creation, fall, redemption, and salvation. History was no longer the story of one people. It became the story of humanity as a whole. This idea also changed how time itself was understood. Ancient thinkers understood time as cyclical, civilizations rising and falling in repeating patterns, but Christian historians tended to view history as linear, a movement from a beginning toward an ultimate purpose, from creation toward a final resolution. In this sense, medieval thought helped history escape what Collingwood calls the substantialist view of the past. the idea that civilizations were fixed entities whose stories simply repeated themselves. Instead, history became a dynamic process, a single unfolding narrative in which human actions were believed to have meaning within a larger cosmic order. Human events still mattered, but their ultimate explanation was often believed to lie beyond human reasoning, in the providence of God. By the Enlightenment, thinkers began approaching history in a new way. Philosophers such as Voltaire and Montesquieu attempted to study the past more systematically. Instead of interpreting events primarily through theology, they began searching for patterns in institutions, laws, and social development. They asked how climate might influence political systems, how economic structures shape societies, how customs and institutions evolve across time. History began to resemble a kind of early social science. Some Enlightenment thinkers even hoped that history might reveal general laws governing human societies, similar to the laws discovered in physics or astronomy. In this sense, history was increasingly treated as a field in which large-scale forces could be studied objectively. But Collingwood believed this approach introduced a new problem. In their search for patterns, Enlightenment historians often began treating societies almost like natural systems. Human events were explained in terms of climate, geography, economic pressures, or institutional structures. These explanations sometimes revealed real influences, but they also risked overlooking something essential. Human beings do not merely react to external forces. They think, they deliberate, they interpret their situations and choose among alternatives. When historians focus only on patterns or structures, they may explain the conditions in which events occur, but they fail to explain the decisions that produce them. In this sense, Collingwood believed Enlightenment historiography made an important advance. It rejected purely theological explanations, but it replaced them with a different kind of abstraction. History became the study of impersonal forces rather than the study of human reasoning in action. And it is precisely this problem that Collingwood believed a true philosophy of history must solve. One thinker, however, began moving in a different direction. The Italian philosopher Giambattista Vico proposed a remarkable idea. Human beings can truly understand history because human beings created it. Vico expressed this insight through a famous principle sometimes summarized as verum factum, the idea that the true is precisely what is made. Human beings cannot fully understand the natural world in the same way that God understands it, because humans did not create nature. But the historical world is different. Laws, institutions, languages, cultures, political systems. These are not products of nature. They are the products of human activity. And because human beings created these structures, human beings can understand them from the inside. History, therefore, becomes the study of the human mind at work in the world. For Collingwood, this insight represented an important turning point in the philosophy of history. History was no longer merely the recording of events. It became the study of human thought expressed in institutions and actions. Collingwood believed historians face a unique problem. Scientists observe natural phenomena. They measure physical processes. They test hypotheses through experiment. But historians cannot observe the past. They cannot reproduce ancient battles in laboratories. They cannot measure the motivations of historical actors directly. The past exists only through traces, documents, artifacts, fragments of evidence, and this means historical knowledge must work differently from scientific knowledge. Collingwood argued that every historical event has two sides, an outside and an inside. The outside of an event is what we can observe physically. A king signs a decree. An army advances. A revolution breaks out. But the historian is not primarily interested in the outward movement itself. What truly matters is the inside of the event, the thinking behind it. What problem did the general believe he was solving? What reasoning led the king to issue that law? What ideas motivated the revolutionaries? The outward event is only the visible surface. The real historical question lies beneath it. This leads to Collingwood's most famous claim. The historian must reenact through the thought of the past in their own mind. To understand Caesar crossing the Rubicon is not simply to record the event. It is to reconstruct the reasoning that led Caesar to that decision. What alternatives did he see? What risks did he calculate? What situation forced his hand? The historian attempts to think through the same problem. In doing so, the past becomes intelligible again, not because we can observe it, but because we can think it once more. For Collingwood, this gives history a deeper meaning. History is not just about learning what happened. It is about understanding the possibilities of human thought. When we reconstruct the reasoning of past people, we discover how human beings have confronted problems across time. Political crises, moral dilemmas, civilizational transformations. In this sense, history becomes a form of self-knowledge. By understanding the thinking of past generations, we begin to understand ourselves. Collingwood's philosophy challenges a familiar assumption. History is not simply the accumulation of facts about the past. It is the reconstruction of human thought expressed in actions. The historian does not merely record events. They attempt to understand the reasoning that produced them, and through that process the past becomes intelligible once again. In the next episode, we'll turn to one of the thinkers who most deeply influenced modern philosophy of history, the German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Because for Hegel, history was not simply a record of events. It was the unfolding of human freedom itself, and understanding that idea may change how we think about the past.